With us now, defense attorney Mike Gottlieb, attorney Scott Bolden as well. Scott, start with you first. What arguments does the defense make tomorrow? You put Buster on the stand and say, gee, this kid has lost his wife or his mother and his son, and at some point you should show mercy to the man who killed both of them?
Well, from a sentencing standpoint, you want to give the court a complete picture of the defendant. That's going to be an uphill climb because the counter testimony from the victims of the families. And remember, the court can take everything into consideration, whether he was charged with it or not charged with it. Here, the murder cases, it's going to be a minimum of 30 years. I predict he's probably going to get more than that. But the defense will try to humanize the defendant. It will try to give the court every consideration or ask the court for every consideration regarding the good deeds he's made over the years, and that the fact that he was addicted to opioids, and ask the court to have some mercy. My understanding of South Carolina law, though, he's going to get a minimum of 30 years, and that might essentially be a life sentence in and of itself. And so they're ready to go, though, and the government's going to put on witnesses and argue for a life sentence, if you will. And so we'll just have to see.
All right. Interestingly enough, that he took the prosecution, Mike, took the death penalty off the table. In a way, does that make it easier on the jury to come to this really quick verdict if they realize that that's not an option?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, picking a jury and death qualifying a jury is a completely different ballgame. And when a jury makes a decision and they know that the implications of their decision are that somebody could die, that somebody's going to the electric chair, that somebody's going to get a needle in their arm, you have to give it a second and a third thought before you make that verdict and you have that weigh on your conscience. In this regard, it's a life decision. It's a lot easier to come to, especially given the weight of the evidence that this jury had to consider. Obviously, an easy decision for them to come to within 3 hours' time.
Yeah, Scott, in terms of sort of the circus and the mystery surrounding this case that had so many different aspects, going back to the fact that the Murdaughs were fixtures in the Daily Mail and the gossip magazines even before the murders, because Paul Murdaugh had been driving a boat where a young woman was killed in, and there was all the issues surrounding that as well. Can the defense at some point make an argument going forward? There should have been a change of venue, even though they gave that up before trial?
Well, if they gave it up before trial and they didn't make the argument or the motion, usually you can protect your record by the court denying it. I don't think that happened in this case, and so this case is famous in getting this level of coverage because of the great irony. You know, America loves a story of the underdog rising to the top from nothing. Here, the Murdaughs were at the top, in control, rich, famous, powerful, if only in South Carolina. And then America also loves the decline, if you will, and how far a rich family or a powerful lawyer falls. It is stuff written about and it made movies about, and this case had all of it, if you will. And so I'm not surprised that the venue stayed where it was, but I'm also not surprised at the coverage. I am surprised, my colleague just said the weight of the evidence. I would say the weight of the circumstantial evidence, because I'm with Ashley. I thought that he may be a liar, he may be a drug addict, he may be many things, but they've got to make that leap to say he's a murderer. And I believe his admissions on the stand and the deprivation and his decline was too much for the jury to really fully consider and not to make that leap, if you will. It was just too much in 3.5 hours. By the way, I've sat on juries before, not criminal, but civil, and they're very deliberate. And this was 6 weeks of evidence, and they clearly didn't buy the credibility of the defendant. But that was his only shot, and they rejected it, and they rejected it pretty quickly.
Yeah, you think about what you have to assume someone is capable of to commit the crime that he is now convicted of, the depravity of emotion, of any humanness to blow away literally your wife and your son is sort of beyond the comprehension of almost any of us of what that would involve. Mike, I thought the point that Scott made about the fall from grace and the irony is amazing. I had two words written down on my note card: power and irony. The power that the Murdaugh family had and the irony of their fall from grace in this sort of spectacular, incredibly sad way, but also in a way that was so destructive across the county and the area of South Carolina that they ruled. It wasn't just a family that had tragedy involved in it. It's a family that created tragedy for so many other families, which in a way makes it sort of almost all the more bizarre and intriguing. But the other thing I thought Scott made a good point about, that America loves these kinds of stories, but perhaps only in America does the law hold to account a family that is that rich and that powerful. As I was hearing the verdict being read in a courtroom that we know Alec Murdaugh argued in, that his ancestors were prosecutors in, and he's being found guilty of murder in that same courtroom and admitting to other crimes in the same courtroom, that's something that only happens in America.
Did I lose program?
They did have significant notoriety. They did have, he was essentially an icon in the town. He was somebody in the town that was essentially like as close as you could get to being a local celebrity. And I suspect that that's why they didn't seek a change in venue. They thought that there were still people that couldn't accept that a Murdaugh could kill, and certainly not that the Murdaugh could kill his family in such a horrible, graphic way, his wife and his beloved pawpaw. I think that they thought that, you know, we can understand him having a drug problem. We can understand him having financial problems. We can understand him stealing from clients, but we can't foresee that he would kill his own family. This is a guy who loved his mom, visited his mom, whose father was dying, and had no motive. Not that the prosecution has to prove a motive, but they couldn't in this case because there was no financial motive. So I think it was a compelling story. I think that's why the news has gripped onto it, and I think that's why the town gripped onto it, and that's why they kept the trial local.
All right, Scott, Mike, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Chris Cuomo coming up at the top.